Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. I am Anzar Kamdar. I'm the head of data science at ThroughPut. We've been working in agricultural and automotive supply chains, everything from port operations. But the real honor and pleasure I have is to introduce Eli Schragenheim, the author of ThroughPut Economics and a theory of constraints expert. If there's, regardless of which industry you're joining from, if there's anything you need specifically, any sort of questions, please ask them. We will have an interactive discussion at the end. Eli?
Hi, Anzar. So I'm Eli, so I'm fortunate to have the same first name like my very big mentor, Dr. Eli Goldratt. I used to be a programmer when I joined Dr. Goldratt, and I created simulation games that their target was to teach managers how to think, which was pretty nice project for a programmer. But then I became an educator, and I became a consultant, and I wrote books, etc. So here we find ourselves here.
Eli, I have a question on the slide. Never say I know, and also never say I don't know. Can you provide some input into that?
Okay, this is, I merged two different insights. Both of them I got from Dr. Eli Goldratt. And never say I know, he came with it as one of the pillars of the theory of constraints. And what he meant is, no matter what are your achievements now, you can still do so much better. So don't tell yourself you know, and by this you stop yourself. From my experience of coming to Eli and being in a good shape, because to discuss things with Eli was always very challenging. And whenever he asked me a question and I said that I don't know, he was all over me. He said, how come you tell me you don't know? At least you know this and you know this, and they are all related. So tell me now. And I learned the lesson. I learned the lesson that I always or almost always know something. And it coupled to me with his a little bit different connotation of never say I know and never say I don't know. Because actually what it teaches me to do, which I think everybody should, is really recognize that there are things that I or you believe that we know, even though we might not know, but sort of this is our current understanding. But there is definitely an area that we don't know, that could contain quite a lot of uncertainty, could contain because we cannot deal too much with complexity, and there are many facts that we don't know. For me, all of this is part of what we don't know, and I always try to make the boundaries. What I sort of know, or at least this, I believe in it until I will see a signal that actually I don't, and what I definitely don't know, and how I can act with those two different ideas coming from different directions. So I really believe that this is of very important insight, and I think I will touch about it later. But Anzar, yes, please.
Thank you, Eli. So based on this insight, I think we can kick off because managers are facing this all the time.
Okay, good. And certainly managers face this as well. And I would immediately bring the other one, because we all fear the unknown. I mean, this is pretty much definite. We fear the unknown. Managers have something else to fear, that they do know what they are fearing about. Why? Just a minute. Because managers often are judged upon result, in which actually when they made the decision, it was based on some known and some unknown facts. So why? Why they suddenly are judged by what is now by people who don't really go to the time where the decision had to be made? And this is a huge fear. The more I deal with organizations and help all kinds of people, I see this fear comes more and more, and it has a very big consequences in managing organizations. And so managers have to find the ways to blame others, because between you and me, I mean, this is a normal way that if we will find somewhere that we are responsible for something, we need to have someone to blame for, and subordinates are very easy to blame. And there is another very big effect, because generally speaking, there are two types of mistakes or big mistakes in making decision. One, if you make a wrong decision, and the other one, if you did not make a decision that had to be done. And definitely, managers prefer to refrain from a required decision because the blaming is much more complicated. When it comes after some time, it's difficult to say, well, a year ago we should have done this, and you did not make this decision, and because of this we are in this deep bad situation. It's easy to blame this way, but what does it mean? It means that risks that should have been taken are too many times are not taken. And when I say should be been taken, I mean probably the downside is not big, but the upside, if this will happen, this is very substantial. So it looks to me such kind of decision should be taken. But we need somehow to put some kind of the personal fear of managers aside. Look, the way it is done now is a very inferior way. Actually, what I see in the vast majority of the organization is trying to ignore what I call common and expected uncertainty, which means uncertainty we all are familiar with. We are not fully surprised when things are going a little bit to the bad side or maybe even to the good side, but we don't want to look there, not directly, and this is really a very inferior way to excel. You cannot really do well under these conditions. What are the elements for, I would say, any good decision? Anything about managing organization should always start with a market demand. Well, we need to come up with something that for it there is a demand, but should it be a demand? Is it big enough? All these kind of questions we need somehow to sense. And this is the first step in any kind of decision we always need to make. The next one, once we understand a little bit or we have some kind of beliefs that we know with the areas that we don't know, we need immediately to make a check. We need to see that we have the required capabilities and capacity and material supply in order to deliver what we believe is going on in the market. This is so important now when we are so much in a time where the common and expected uncertainty came up dramatically from 2019 to 2020, now to 2021. It does not end here. Eventually, what is good or not so good decision most of the time We say, okay, generally speaking, we would like to make more money. Okay, sort of this is a goal. And so we need to calculate whatever we see now and the steps that we like or consider to take, how much bottom line will it bring us? How much? We need to have some kind of idea. Those are, from my point of view, the three required elements, starting with the market demand, going into whether we have capacity, and calculating what it will do to the bottom line. And fellows, in each one of those elements, there is inherent uncertainty. We cannot be precise. We don't have the data. We have some kind of knowledge coupled with quite a big area of we really don't know. And we better admit exactly what we don't know. And this is, of course, going throughout all the three elements. So here are the three elements again. And I'd like you also to notice one important thing. Each one of them is an area of knowledge. In most organizations, they have a VP for each one of those very big areas, which requires different capabilities of the manager, different certain knowledge, capabilities, etc. Because sensing the market demand is one expertise, operation is another, finance is yet another. But the alternatives in each one of them has an impact on the total. So we need always to consider certain alternatives, which, like, depending on price, if we don't have enough operational flexibility, maybe we should increase the price. If we don't have enough market, maybe we should consider to decrease the price, okay? And we have different market segments that we can go in, and we have lead times in which it's important to our customers. These are three areas. And if we like to get the uncertainty in the area where we don't know into some kind of control, we need somehow to bring them together and really look into the uncertainty, into the eyes to see here it is, and we are considering all kinds of alternatives, and we are considering all the options.
Thank you, Eli. So essentially, we just spoke about managers that are often risk averse that are dealing with this uncertainty. And now we're looking at three interlinked functions within an organization, oftentimes with data siloed in different systems, making decisions, managers in each of these elements, making decisions that not necessarily just have to deal with uncertainty from the market, but also creating, for example, volatility for each of the other functions based on their decisions. As you mentioned, there's trade-offs. So as a result, same risk-averse managers could be paralyzed sometimes.
Oh yes, tell me about it.
Perhaps you can give us an example, like any sort of industry.
Look, take a chocolate manufacturer, and let us assume for the story that there are 6 different production lines. Each one is dedicated to a family of products. Now, here suddenly they realize a problem. The demand for product 1 or the first family is going up and up and up and up and up. And the result is that the line is fully producing 24/7. We don't have even a minute spare, and we still don't supply all the current demand that our competitors are trying to go into. And we have another line in which, what can we do? We have demand for only 40% of the capacity of the production line that is dedicated to that a specific family of products, family of chocolates. And now here comes the big idea. Let us convert the line, which has only currently 40% utilization, into the product in which we see the rise in demand and it's going on, and we cannot supply that demand, which means we will have much more flexibility. First of all, the key element number one is that we have to sense the demand as best as we can. In other words, we need to forecast. Somehow estimating, sensing, this is more like sometimes forecasts are computerized, so we have some mathematical algorithm based on the past, but many times we just speculate. I mean, we have some intuition about the market, so we speculate into it. And what we need to do, that we don't always do, actually is, oh, wow. Okay, somehow, again, sharing or what happens to me? Do you see my screen? I'm sorry that we have suddenly people.
Apologies for the technical difficulties. I see your screen, Eli. It's the first element on slide 5.
Okay, but I don't see it, which is kind of a problem. Okay, now I see it. I'm sorry. I mean, there's something. Okay, fellow, no matter what, every decision is about the future. So we have to predict what's going to happen. This we do all the time. The only way we are actually doing it is we rely on the past. We learned, we extrapolate for it. This is the way we do with everything. Every one of us is doing anyway, whether as a manager or as a human being, whatever. However, when we speak about forecast as an information that should support decision, the one thing that we should never do is to treat it as one number. I think this is a huge insight to suddenly understand. Because even if we take the mathematics algorithm and how mathematics describe uncertain functions, it does have a central value and it does have the spread. So at least two different parameters to define the value and the uncertainty. But instead of central value and plus minus, I find it much more useful from practical point of view is to use a range. So any management decision has, to my mind, to be based on a predicted range rather than on one number. And of course, this has all kinds of implications. The most important implication, to my mind, is that the estimated amount of uncertainty is fully recognized. We really look into the uncertainty, and yes, it might be here and it might be here. Currently, we don't think it will be beyond it, but it's somewhere here. Where here? Well, this is really fall under, I don't know. So actually what it comes to that managers have to take into account for every alternative that they try to consider, the impact if reality will be closer to the conservative here and when reality will be here. And this gives a range of possible results. Maybe some of that are not very desired, some are very desired. Yes, but this is where we have to make a decision. Another implication of it is regarding targets. Generally speaking, I don't like targets, I have to tell you, but this is a discussion for another day. Generally speaking, when we come with forecasts that are given as a range rather than one number, we certainly say something about our expectation, let us say from our people, that they should try to be above the conservative. Okay, conservative is pretty much the minimum that we expect, even though it still might happen that we will achieve less, but let us say. And we don't truly expect to be higher than the optimistic. When we do this, we sort of become something like realistic. I'd like to give you a personal example. Suppose I need to go to the airport, take a flight. Suppose on average, the ride from my home to the airport is 45 minutes. This is for average. So what will you suggest to me to go out 45 minutes before the time I really need to be there? Look, I can tell you that sometimes it could take only 30 minutes, and really spending time in the airport is not very nice. I don't like it, but all right, sometimes this happens. But if I also tell you that sometimes traffic, that maybe I don't know exactly how much it is right now, might take it to 1.5 hours. Do you understand that I have a decision on my hand? Should I go, let us say 30 minutes, and then I will probably be late? Sometimes I want to be late, by the way. Or I want to be very certain I will go 1.5 hours before. And yes, I will need to spend undesired time at the airport, but this is what I can do, given the area of unknown. This is again coming to the range and to the targets, I hope. Anzar, you can stop me whenever you feel I'm not very clear or you like to highlight something more, please.
Oh, sure. Like the fact that the uncertainty itself is an input into decision making is a very valuable insight. I believe, there's this misconception that Goldratt does not like forecasting. Yes, when it comes to subjective one number forecasts that resemble crystal balling, yes, but pretty much any decision that you make is, whether you're using statistical process control, it is incorporating information from the past, from the present, and looking out ahead.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, I know as a fact that Goldratt did not fully say that get rid of forecast. He used to say it again, like you said, for something very specific, and again to make a very clear point. You know, I once went to Goldratt that he said something in public that looked to me that most of the time it's true, but there are times in which it's not true. And I asked him about it. And so he told me, you know, Eli, if I would be very precise and people will not follow my advice, I want them, first of all, to follow my advice and then to get somewhat more clever and see when it does not apply. So even with this, Goldratt understood very well the need for forecasting and the need to understand uncertainty and protect ourselves from it. But I went a little bit more. And something that we need to put very clearly into the scene. We should not exaggerate the uncertainty into cases that are truly rare. They do happen, but they're rare. So if I can come up with a range, and usually I don't have the mathematics or the statistic to say exactly that I like to have a 90% confidence interval, I may be not able to reach this number intuitively. I want to understand that any range I give is, let us say, my best estimation, are that it includes between 80 to 90% of what might happen in reality. And so I do recognize, to start with, the possibility that the actual outcome will be outside the range, but of course I like to reduce it so it will not be all the time, only sometime. But please see, if it never happens, well, I think I or my people exaggerate in a big way. And this does not lead to very good decision most of the time. Now, this understanding that sometimes we get surprising sort of result also make us understand how important are those kind of signals that actually tell us maybe there is a change that you did not take into account. Maybe the trend in the market is changing, and I'm giving you just a first signal for it. Could be for a specific product, service, family. I think this is part of kind of the culture that needs, because we understand the nature of uncertainty, we understand that our level of not knowing, and then we understand that when we see a signal that looks like in a kind of a conflict, Goldratt used to call it a mystery. It's against my previous assumption. This is a very valuable to look for it and try to understand what it means. And then it might tell me, Eli, you don't have an option. You need to roll a new forecast now with your improved understanding. Now look again on uncertainty and go ahead.
Eli, perhaps the point that you just raised here, whether we're talking about quantitative forecasting with confidence intervals, like that's common knowledge, but I feel that whether it's qualitative forecasting by our intuition or quantitative forecasting, the idea of how to actually use these ranges, how to use that uncertainty into decision making is not necessarily well understood. For example, like if we can somehow magically reduce forecast error to 0, it would be very easy to plan operations and capacity. Since that is not realistic, although we're making advances, there's just too many known unknowns and unknown unknowns. We could just look at, COVID, for example, although, some might debate that it could have been known. I think the point here is, from a software perspective, from a modeling perspective, regardless of the ranges, the confidence intervals, what gets plugged into the model typically is the expected value. And now if you're talking across, not just one SKU, if you're talking about 10,000 SKUs with each of their expected values and different uncertainty ranges, all of a sudden, you're using these one number forecasts to make decisions that don't necessarily translate into the best decision financially. Just because the distribution you're using the central value, it does not necessarily translate into the best decision financially.
First of all, see something else even. If you have, let us say, a range, no matter whether it's confidence range or reasonable range, the way I take it. Look, if you go to the, let us say, left-hand side, but what will happen to you is the other side, you get a certain damage, either because you are losing sales or because, let us say, that you have too much. If you decide to take the other side, there is another damage if eventually what will happen is not that side. Between the two damages, most of the time, according to my experience, one is much bigger damage than the other, which actually tell us you need to choose based on the least damage of the possibilities. And now this actually means to you is that almost never I like to take the in-between. The in-between, if the damages are about the same, you can take the in-between. But most of the time, the way I've seen it, I need to go a little bit more to the extreme and have some kind of protection from the damage if the real reality will come into the other side. Am I clear here?
Yes, absolutely. I think like a lot of companies found out that having too much demand, especially, during these COVID spikes and like downturns and surges, is not necessarily a good thing if you're not able to meet that demand. You lose customers, you lose service levels. Uh, and the fact that, a lot of these companies are also tapped out as far as their utilization goes, and they're lacking operational flexibility, it just compounds the problem. Perhaps we can jump into that.
Absolutely, and we will, and this is part of understanding the market, and you need also to see how the market will react. Because again, if you cannot supply all the market for you, the market will find someone else to supply it. And not necessarily once you have the capacity, you will get it. But for this, we need flexibility. And so here we came into the second key element. We need flexibility. So one thing, if we give to operations a range, total range, or even for every SKU a range, this can be interpreted into the operational requirements, and we need from operation to be able to respond to each side of the range, which basically means that if what will happen to you will be closer to the conservative, you are left with excess capacity. Okay, you need to entertain the idea that having excess capacity is sometimes or many times, depending on your analysis, better than running out of capacity totally, have so much demand which is not met, which will find itself other companies to serve, and maybe stay with those companies, and maybe also go to other products that they sell instead of continue to buy from you. So this is part of the kind of understanding the culture of dealing with uncertainty. Will come to it. But there is something else, because it should be that we should expect from our operation to be flexible a little bit even more. Generally speaking, like we thought, if suddenly we see something that we don't fully expect to, like sudden COVID-19 appears, and suddenly we understand the extent of it. And so we need very fast to make quick changes because the market will have quick changes. So we need to re-understand the market and have enough flexibility to adapt as fast as possible. And if we can do it, we will take our competitors by a huge amount, because in these times of huge uncertainty is where the number 5 in the competition could be easily suddenly become number 1, and then try to compete with number 1. But it also teaches us regarding forecast that you need to have different forecasts for different time horizons. Because if I just look for the next month, okay, maybe I don't expect huge change in the next months. But if I look a little bit into the future, and there are elections coming, and the election coming might, who knows, might put a change in the economic policy of the government, which has certain effect on my market. I need to take it into account based on my kind of focus of who might win the election. Does it make sense that that party will win, or it does not make much sense? At least we need to look into it and make our decisions. So when it comes to the longer term forecast, first of all, naturally, it has much more the wider range. But within it, we need more, not just to look into the past, but try to learn from the past what happens when we see certain signals. like change that might come from elections, or change that might come from a plague, or coming out of a plague. We need this kind of assumptions about the future and include it into the range, because this will tell us so much more how much flexibility we should prepare for this time horizon. And by the way, to prepare takes time. If you need to buy or even convert a production line from one product to another, it takes time. So it might take to convert, could take only 3 months. But if you like to buy a full production line, not always that it costs several millions, but it will take 2 years until it will be operative within your manufacturing shop floor. So you need to check excess capacity definitely. But what you might also need is to check excess capabilities, like multi-skilled workers. That if I don't have enough work for them in the, let us say in the warehouses, I can bring them into the shop floor because they can still be good operators. Or I can make them good operators in almost no time, because these are these kind of people. So this is another consideration about operational flexibility. And there are certain necessary conditions for operational flexibility. The way I see the world right now, including the theory of constraint, many times we have internal constraint, and many times we need to see at what, first of all, reveal hidden capacity with it. This is great. But once we exploit the internal one in a good sense, we need somewhat immediately to think about elevation. But could be elevation will cost us quite a lot. And because of this, it's better, generally speaking, and it's including better to non-constraints who, from whatever change in the market might become constraints, to look for means, temporary means, fast means to increase their capacity in almost no time, like overtime. I mean, between you and me, any equipment that does not work 24/7, with some more people, I can utilize it more. Okay, good understanding. I just have some temporary people, and then I can utilize or can use my capacity much more, and I can grab opportunities that I did not succeeded to grab before. Outsourcing is also kind of possibility to buy temporary capacity elsewhere, because somebody else has too much excess capacity. We certainly learned, both from theory of constraint and from lean, that work in process needs to be in tight control. Don't waste it. Don't have too much work in process, because this is flexibility that you need because of this common and expected uncertainties that says that one day you don't have much pressure, the other day you have too much pressure. So we need somehow to respond as fast as possible, and we can only when we put work in process in good control and there are enough knowledge in the market for it. And this lends itself very nicely into the whole idea. Don't go to overproduction. You are wasting not just materials, and maybe you will sell it, who knows, maybe 1 year from now, and maybe you will need to reduce the prices so much in order just to get rid of it. Not just because of this, but because you like to grab real opportunities in the market that you don't know right now, but you will know when they will come up. And you know something like this will come up. And when they come up, we like to grab them. And for this, we cannot waste our resources doing something for the future in which we don't need it. Certainly not now. Something else that really came from TOC, and I really recommend anyone who does not understand what I'm talking about to look in the material for something called buffer management. I think this is one of the biggest insights ever, at least ones that I was exposed to, and which come to maintain very effective priority system, and one priority system in operations, in order to say what needs to be done now, what can wait just a little bit more, not much, just a little bit more. And we need to look for materials, because it's enough, we all know it, it's enough that we miss just one material and suddenly so much more is shut off and we cannot do. So we need to manage material buffers. And fellows, eventually, we like to work with very reliable suppliers. Also suppliers that maybe they are not all that cheap, but if I need a favor and I need suddenly materials that I did not order in time, and I need it suddenly. So, okay, I made a mistake. What can I do? But now I need it, that I can get it, even for a markup. But they will come and say, all right, Eli, we will do something special for you. The markup will be so and so. And fellow, I need it. I need it in order to exploit all the demands that I can get from the market. It's so damned important. Anzar, what do you think?
Thank you, Eli. So when we talk about operational capacity, measuring capacity from modeling and software perspective, it's one of the hardest things to measure. Like when we talk about the market and the uncertainty in the market and the demand, that's quite easy to tell. But you even have this inherent system, variability and uncertainty, as in, can you, as like a global CEO with 10 factories, know down to the level like how much capacity you have, whether it's based on your employees because of possible strikes, downtimes, electricity outages, shortages, material shortages. It's very difficult to measure. At the same time, I've seen in modeling a wrong approach to operational flexibility. When we talk about needing a seasonal workforce, I've seen models where there's hiring and firing. That's not necessarily the best way to do it, because as you mentioned, there's a lead time between, for example, training a new worker versus getting a new production line. Sometimes there's like 2 years wait list for equipments. So the approach to operational flexibility definitely needs to be improved. And from a modeling perspective, I think it's simply because there is, unfortunately, the way that people are using the financial metrics right now when it comes to possibly buying a new production line, keeping it busy the whole time, which results in overproduction, results in some of these problems, keeping large amounts of what. I think we can probably jump into that aspect as well, because that is the true target variable.
All right, of course, we need to go to there, but let me tell you something. Even when you say about capacity, so I have even one factory and I don't know exactly how much capacity I have, which sort of lent itself to a new term that TOC came up with called protective capacity, which means I need to plan not for 100%, I need to plan for less, because the numbers I have for capacity are not precise, and all the other Murphy kind of happenings, like downtime, like bad materials, mistakes of people, quite a lot of things we know. We sense not just the market. In a way, we need to sense operation as well. And the buffer management I already mentioned is a great tool to let us understand this sensitivity. in our capacity. So really, Anzar, thank you for bringing it up, because we need to take protective capacity into consideration and really check in reality eventually. Because we start with a range and then we say, well, sometimes we need a wider range, or maybe we learn the lesson and we can have a shorter range. But like you said, eventually it comes into the financial impact. And the financial impact is extremely important, because eventually if we have so much excess capacity, there is a real concern. We pay for this, okay? Should we cover it? We need to know. Okay, let us say something like this. Given the future forecast, and we have our capacity analysis, do we now know how much more money we will have? Because with market opportunity, it looks like we have about the capacity and the capabilities that we need. Do you know how to do it? Because I can tell you that the current tools of management accounting simply cannot do this. And if you take the margin per unit and now you try to calculate it, fellow, you will get something distorted all the way. So we need something else. So this is, for me, was a huge insight, even though all the roots existed even before Eli Goldratt. I have to tell you this. I started my MBA degree back in 1976, almost 10 years before I met Dr. Eli Goldratt. And I had this professor of accounting who told his pupils something like this: any manager who takes the cost per unit as such is an idiot who eventually will get what he deserves. So, okay, so it was known before. What was not so much known before, how we deal with it, how you are making decisions in such kind of environment. And Eli Goldratt came, I would say, out of nowhere and came with a term. There are a similar term in accounting, but they are not used in the right way. He called it throughput. And throughput, the way I understand it, is actually a measure of the actual added value that the organization succeeded to achieve. The simple definition of it is a revenues minus the truly variable costs. Materials and some additional truly variable costs. Okay, everything you pay your salespeople for a good sale, and sometimes you can really put energy, exactly the energy that went into the specific one. Okay, this is throughput. Of course, you need to understand also throughput is not the only one financial measure. There are how much money we need to put into the system in order eventually to generate throughput. So we have operating expenses, which are all the cost: salaries, rent, transportation, all the expenses that do not vary with every single additional sale. They are not fixed. I don't like the name fixed costs because they are not fixed. On the other hand, very small changes in the quantity will keep them intact. Then there are investment, which is usually the longer term expenses that we put in order to buy machines. Also, inventory can be treated like this as investments. I want to make something clear. Both operating expenses and investment are actually about maintaining capacity. And with this capacity, with the right capabilities, are needed in order to generate throughput. This is the way it is done. And eventually, when we have this kind of measurements, net profit before tax, So you can use it as EBIT or EBITDA, depending again on your actual needs. But actually it equals to throughput, the total throughput, the total revenues minus the truly variable cost, and minus all the money that we needed to put to maintain the capacities that we need. And if you come to think a little bit more about it, when I take just another market opportunity, come on top of it, you can already see that I speak about delta T minus delta OE in order to see how much more or less we will have into our bottom line. In general speaking, there is another one, which is a return on investment. In general speaking, equals to the throughput minus operating expenses, which is a profit divided by the money that is held within the organization. What is so special about throughput? I want to make it clear. I've seen all kinds of terms that are relatively similar, like contribution margin. Not exactly the same, but a little bit similar, but it's not treated in the right way. Because just to be fixed on the total, about the total contribution is something that is not used. Throughput starts with a total. And the good thing about throughput, in its way, it is linear, which means if we double the sales, generally speaking, most of the cases, throughput will be doubled as well. Of course, there could be all kinds of different product mix and could be reduction in price because of quantities that make some small changes to the linear. But then here comes the operating expenses. And here I want to make it clear. Operating expenses change in a non-linear way. If you double the quantity, you not necessarily will double the operating expenses. It might be much less, sometimes it could be more. And the reason is, many resources have enough spare capacity. So when you double it, when maybe 50% already is covered by the double capacity and does not cost you anything. Okay, if you fully double it, you need a little bit more, so this will cost you a little bit more. Okay. On the other hand, this more capacity, when we add capacity, in too many times it costs much more than the capacity currently of what you have. So fellows, good that we have now very good computers. Certainly that they can take all kinds of scenarios about changes in throughput. They can even take all kinds of scenarios about operating expenses. So here are some of the implications. When facing a forecast, changing a big change like COVID-19 or a new market opportunity, all are bound to be uncertain. So there is a need to evaluate. Eventually, we like to do the whole calculation. From this, there is a change up to the bottom, all the way down, I would say, to the bottom line. And it starts with looking just at the throughput. Because something else that you need to understand, throughput is a certain data set that is pretty much different than operating expenses. And this already makes it a difference than most of the accounting tools that are not able to do this differentiation. Because if I look on throughput, first of all, I would say, okay, I have more market to get for my popular chocolate. How much it might be? I need to take it into account. And when I take it into account, I need to have conservative and optimistic forecast. And so if it is conservative, my delta throughput will be plus, but maybe not so much. But if I take the optimistic one, well, my delta throughput will be much more. Okay, this is not all. You need to take also kind of a look on the other regular sales. And if in order to achieve this extra throughput, you had to stop selling not very popular product, I admit, but still it's something that you sell. It's something that still brings you throughput now. So you need to reduce the delta T from what the lost throughput because of what you don't sell. Eventually, I need the bottom line, the impact on the bottom line. So we need to calculate if we need more capacity. And by the way, this will happen mostly when you speak about optimistic forecast. Optimistic forecast, you may find out you don't have enough capacity for it, but maybe you can get more capacity for it, but then it costs you extra. And now we have extra delta operating expenses. And now we can still check whether it should be here delta T minus delta OE, or I go to the total and ask myself, okay, Eli, compare the new T minus OE, the way you see it now, relative to your current situation of the current T minus OE. Is it good? Great. Not so good? Try something else. Well, I'd like now to go to the overall conclusion and then we can speak. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late, but this is because of my sudden shutdown of my computer. All right. Conclusion one, management should be able to consider the level of uncertainty. Look, I believe it is a must, and yes, I understand it is change in the culture. We need to make this step. We can get a lot of support from software, we can get a lot of support from analytics, but we need to make this step, especially on future sales. But also we need to have this kind of a look on the need for capacity and materials. Fellow, again, even on the level of uncertainty, we start from the past, which means mathematical algorithms know how to do it. But again, even intuition, we already know how to do it. I find even with intuition that it's much easier for me to state a range rather than one number. I only need to have it in my mind. Now, if this happens, what will happen now is actually we open the door for a variety of new, even crazy ideas. Ideas that the people who have them would, today they don't dare to raise them, because if they raise them and it is done and then the result is negative, they will be blamed. So they don't dare to bring them now. Now, if we have the way to judge the impact of uncertainty, then what's the point? Why not? I'm ready to listen to many crazy ideas. Only if they are truly crazy, the range will be pretty wide. But until I check everything, I don't know how it looks like. So each idea needs to be checked both based on two scenarios, conservative and optimistic. This should be, again, part of the culture, conservative and optimistic. So we can speculate what will be the impact of the idea on the bottom line. Think how good it will be. We need to do something else. Ideas, from my experience, do not come just one at a time. Once you open the door for new ideas, suddenly many ideas will come up. Ideas that looks like they have a very good upside part. Of course, we will need to check also the downside part, of course. After all, we need to check the combination. Again, compare it with our capacity, because if so many new ideas come that will expand the market, well, I don't know whether we have enough capacity and whether we have enough flexibility to increase capacity in relatively short time. Give me some kind of knowledge and I will say what I can do and what not, and then we might discuss again what flexibility we should provide for the future. Fellows, I think this is a great way to eventually become what Nissim Taleb meant by anti-fragile, which means looking into uncertainty, understand uncertainty, and take this kind of idea that we can capitalize on the existence of uncertainty for our good, that we will take ideas that definitely from time to time they will bring us small losses, many times they will bring us much more, so on average we will do so much more. Fellow, I believe this is the way. Fellow, this is basically crystallize the content of the book I had the honor to work with Henry Camp and Rocco Suras, two great people. We cover, I think, the whole way. So I believe it is important, and now it's up to you to ask questions.
Thank you for that, Eli. And yes, this book, although ThroughPut Accounting has been around for a while, this book was very, very influential on us. And, you know, as a artificial intelligence company, as our software product also coincidentally named Eli, it was very, very influential in being able to translate some of this demand uncertainty, capacity, flexibility, and all of these issues in a way to actually gauge the financial impact of them, and more importantly, the target variable itself. So you're not necessarily sub-optimizing, for example, on a certain part of the supply chain and overproducing, or just having so much demand that you're not able to meet it and losing market share. So it was very, very influential. Perhaps we can jump into the questions, Eli. We have quite a few. I'll start in the order of the elements. So let's start with forecasting. I believe the first question we have is it true TOC doesn't believe in forecasts? We already addressed this. It's not necessarily true, but
I would like to say in my own voice.
Yes.
I think this is a wrong interpretation of Dr. Goldratt, and I'm trying to say it as loud as I can. Okay? No, we need forecast. Even from the TOC vocabulary, putting a buffer means it is based on some kind of a forecast. Changing the buffer based on buffer management is understanding a little bit more from the past on the future. And this is forecast. Even what is called in theory of constraints, a dynamic buffer management. For me, it is a forecast, not so much of the demand, but of the combination of inventory and demand together. Kind of answering the question, do we have enough inventory in the system?
And the second part of this question was, what is the proposed approach to plan supply for an industry highly exposed to variability like agriculture? And Eli, you already answered that. When we're talking about seasonal industries, dynamic buffer management, you plan the buffers based on the time of the year or other variables, whether it's tied to the soil, weather patterns, and so forth. So,
Anzar, if you come to seasonality, you need some kind of forecast.
Yeah.
Because you might need to plan your capacity way ahead of time. This is for another webinar probably, or something more, but there is a combination between forecasting a little bit into the longer term in dynamic buffer management, which usually look for the really next short period of time, let us say not more than a month.
I'll just combine these next two questions. One aspect is how to make sure that the past data is actually relevant to the decision. And I believe this is when, for example, things are changing, your capacity is changing, you're adding or removing capacity. And the other aspect is how do you actually translate a range of the forecast to create a supply and production plan?
Okay, the first question. Remind me again the first one, I'm sorry.
No problem at all. So this is about how to make sure what past data is actually relevant to take the decision.
Great, yes. Because it's one of the key things that we need to use our intelligence. Look, when we just record data, we record data. Is it relevant data? It is a question. I'm sure you understand by yourself, I think you understand because you also asked the question, that if we try to make some kind of forecast now of demand, what happens before 2020 is probably not relevant because they were different times. I'm pretty certain, by the way, that the consumption market will change. And because of this, again, even 2020 might not be too much of good indication for 2021 or 2022. So fellow, we need our intelligence. And the more artificial intelligence will go on, the more it will help us to say what data is not relevant. Until then, we will need to do this work.
Thank you, Eli. And I believe the next part is about how do you actually translate the range of a forecast to create a supply and production plan. I think this is because typically, most models use deterministic inputs. We talked about expected value that goes into these.
Okay, so I need to do two different scenarios. One scenario, let us take the conservative scenario. So according to the conservative, we will sell from product one this amount, for product two, product three, product four, etc. How much capacity it is from every key resource or critical resource, I call resources that from time to time ran out of capacity, and I want to know. So I can calculate it. More than that, I can also calculate also what happens when we lack capacity. This we more go when I look now on the optimistic side. So we will sell so much more. There will be enough opportunity in the market, hopefully, of course. But then I say, if we go there and we lack capacity, but let us see, can we add over time, enough over time? It gives us already something. So this is something that you can do. What do you mean you can do? You probably need your computer, you can do your forecast. Look, you can write even a program in Excel to do it. Of course, if you have a dedicated software, it's even nicer, but it can be done. Computers know how to do this kind of things. So to take ranges all over the place, and you take a range here, just to get the idea of whether you might run out of capacity or not. So I believe this is the answer for you.
I believe you also mentioned earlier in the webinar that instead of just using the expected value across, let's say, 20 different product lines, you can actually, with how advanced computers and modeling has become, you can actually look at not necessarily the distribution of your financial impact, and that's to translate this demand and this demand variability matched with your capacity profile to what your expected bottom line would be. Because taking, the median or the mean or the central value across all of these products is not necessarily going to translate linearly to how much profit you're going to make.
And more than that, when you aggregate the forecast for every, you cannot aggregate it to a range because you will get a too wide range. But even using the mathematical formula for this kind of aggregation of and how it impacts the, let us say, the confidence interval is wrong because within your items, there are some dependencies. The sales of product 3 are not totally independent from the sales of product 2. For instance, belonging to the same generic brand already says something, because if the level of the brand goes up, probably both sales will go up, and if down, both. So actually, we are in a kind of a sense that we need not to aggregate the demand, we need to redo the forecast for the aggregation. So we need to understand to live with several forecast runs. But again, the possibility of today's computers are so that they can do it. Just tell them to do it based on what, and they will do it for you.
And I think there's an advantage to actually using a software product because it keeps like a feedback loop continuously, as in you can keep improving your forecast. You can keep, testing these different production plans for, let's say, resilience or risk reduction. Eli, I think we're stepping into the second key element when we're talking about operational flexibility. Maintaining excess capacity creates a conflict with the factory, as this creates idleness and increased unallocated costs. How you approach this conflict and solve it? I believe we already mentioned this, but I'll let Eli speak to it.
If you go a little bit more into throughput accounting or throughput economics, you will see even more what I think is useless of allocating cost or the cost of idle machines. Because I need this level of flexibility that I sometimes need. What can I do? If you take the fact that your market is not one line throughout the year, but it is fluctuating, you already see that sometimes you need more capacity and sometimes less. So this has to happen, whether you like it or not. And what's the use of the machine? I mean, I have the user machine because through it I can sell. If I don't sell, it would be idle. So you want that if I don't sell, that I will still produce? Please see what it means. I'm sorry, I cannot give you the full answer, because please, if you can read a little bit more about it, you will really see what it goes to. You know what, I like to tell you a story about me, because what can we say? We all have this kind of sentiment that if something we paid money is not used, we a little bit take it into my heart. I once, many times actually, I went to the US, and in the US, okay, I know when I go down in a certain airport, I need to rent a car, and then I go to somewhere, to the hotel that my client have registered me into, and I put my car in. Next day, the client will come to fetch me from the hotel, and at the end of the day will bring me back. My rented car is staying idle. Okay? Now, when I went back, suddenly it occurred to me, well, I have a car, why shouldn't I take it and look for another restaurant? Why should I have the restaurant in the hotel? By the way, it was a very good restaurant. And just when I said it to myself, I suddenly grabbed myself, really? This is what you think of? About the cost per day of the car standing idle just because you really don't need it. But what can you do? You need it very much on day one, and when you go back to the airport. This is where you need it, and you just took it for this. Okay, we need a little bit to update our mind.
Yes, absolutely. You can actually just look at a simple example, like especially during COVID. All of a sudden, there were a lot of companies that, because of cost-cutting measures, reduced their workforce, reduced their machinery, maybe sold off their assets. And all of a sudden, when demand picked up, they're not able to meet those, the optimistic side of the demand all of a sudden. And that's what happens when you don't have protective capacity, so to speak. As far as this example, Ellie, with the cars, now there's ride sharing, so the car can be utilized by someone else if possible. So there are technical solutions now.
Okay.
I think the next one we have is about the suppliers. There are not so many suppliers with reliable replenishment times. Perhaps I can, speak to this as in if it's a very valuable supplier to you and, you have the financial, might, companies like Toyota, for example, develop their supplier base. It's very important. Like, if there's just no reliable suppliers, this is another one of those, do you really know? Or, and if you do, there are things you can do about it. But Ellie, go ahead.
No, I think this is also something strategic enough to make some kind of what if a game, if you want. Let us say that instead of a regular chip supplier, but not that reliable, we make an arrangement with much more reliable supplier who is much more expensive. But let us take some scenarios. And let us take some scenarios that our not too reliable supplier caused us 2 or 3 happenings within the year that caused us to lose a client, maybe not the biggest one, but still 1 or 2 or 3 or something of the sort. And let us see whether the extra cost that we pay for the reliable supplier with whom it would not have happened, worth it or not. I think it is a very worthwhile kind of exercise to do. And then you get a little bit more intuition about when you are not going to compromise about the reliability of the supply and when, well, maybe this is not that much critical, not for this type of supplier.
So if you're actually able to, for example, do these what if analysis and look at the trade-off, so to speak, between an expensive supplier and what it's actually going to do to your bottom line, there's possible win-win scenarios. For example, giving your supplier like a better credit terms through backing them. Of course, these are very common solutions. I think
all kinds of variations that you can check if you think it's important enough to put the efforts into it.
Yes. Ellie, now we have a question. Is this an evolution of S&OP, sales and operations planning?
To my mind, yes. To my mind, it's connected to the generic idea of sales and operation planning. I mean, I heard about sales and operation planning, I don't remember exactly when, but it was towards the end of the 80s. And I remember the guy, Richard Link, who came up with this term. And at that time, I thought that TOC can do it so much better. So yes, you might say yes, but it takes a financial part of it, I think, even more deeply than it was intended, at least at the past. So yes, I think it is a development of sales and operation planning, but using, of course, some of the key insights of the theory of constraint together.
So we have another question. What has been described so far is addressed with the IBP, I believe that's SAP, Integrated Business Planning Process. Can you share some differences?
No, because I don't know this IBP very well. Can you, Anzar?
Oh yeah, sure. I can speak to it. So one of the major aspects is, as Ellie was mentioning, and how it's come up before, because of cost accounting and some of these allocation expenses, right? I'll just give you our situation maybe 2-3 years ago before we came across Ellie's book. We were in concepts such as machine hour rates. We were in concepts such as allocating downtime to product costs, trying to actually tie in a decision, whether it's coming from the demand or the operations or the capacity, into an accurate financial model without this sort of distortions, right? Because of the unit pricing. It was very, very difficult. As far as like IBP is concerned, yes, it is a form of, as Ellie mentioned, sales and operations planning, but the financial aspect, being able to dynamically see the effect of your different demand profiles and different capacity setups immediately, and to be able to double check these decisions, not just computationally, but also with your intuition on the ground. That's something new, and that's very, very important because there's some other key differences that I can get into as far as some of the models being used, but we can always schedule another call for that. I believe, Eli, that's most of the questions. If you have any other questions, or if we did not address your questions, please feel free to reach out to us, to reach out to Eli directly. And this webinar will be on demand. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Eli.